Adonis Stevenson pulling off a third round knockout over Thomas Williams Jr. and to defend his WBC light heavyweight championship of the world. And in what was really a fun fight, a fight that some people were calling to be an exciting fight, and other people were saying, like, kind of cautiously calling it because they know Thomas Williams' past. He has a history that's a little bit up and down, but he's a guy that always comes to fight, and he definitely did in this fight. Especially after Stevenson dropped him in the first round, dropped him pretty hard. Looking like Williams may not finish out the first round, but he did. He was able to recover, and he was able to actually land a couple of his own shots towards the end of the first round. The second round, however, is where Williams started to make it look like it was really going to be a straight-up war, like his last 2-3 fights have been, where he just went out, went blow for blow with Stevenson, catching Stevenson a couple of times to the head in particular, where he was able to kind of either momentarily stun or otherwise rock Stevenson a little bit across the ring. Stevenson came back with his own shots, of course. It seemed like they kind of took turns buzzing each other a couple of times in the second round. But overall, I thought Williams actually won the second round. But I did notice an adjustment towards the end of the second round by Stevenson, where he started going to the body a little bit more against Williams. He wasn't focused so solely on head hunting, especially with Williams kind of closing the distance behind a high guard, looking to try and get inside and land those really just nasty hooks and uppercuts. But Stevenson started going to the body, and that body work really paid dividends in the third round, where he started off going to the body, was able to kind of back Williams up against the ropes, and eventually just kind of set him up with a jab and a left hand following the jab, and it was basically just night-night. Williams fell damn near flat on his face, like just almost like a crouched, crawling posture. Tried to get up. You could tell he was still badly wobbled. He kind of turned around in a sitting position, but by then the ref was already at about 7-8, and the ref, counted out the last couple of ticks, and that was pretty much all there was to it. That was it for Thomas Williams as far as his chances of winning this fight. So Williams pulls off a pretty nasty knockout. Definitely one of the more fun fights of his that's happened lately. It seems like most of the guys that he's fought lately have been overmatched, and to a certain degree that includes Thomas Williams. But at the very least, Williams came to really fight and came to score and knock out himself. He was throwing shots, like I said on Twitter. I said that he was throwing shots like it was the boxing version of home run derby, which is how he likes to fight. Harkening back especially to the fight that he had with Edwin Rodriguez, who's very similar in that regard. They both throw punches like they're trying to land the heaviest shot on like how much power do you have machine or something like that machine that Ivan Drago hit in Rocky 4. Like he's trying to get the high score on that thing, but unfortunately the overall technique wasn't there to save him, and he wound up getting knocked out by Stevenson. What's next for Stevenson? Not quite sure exactly. Later, Alvarez, his mandatory, his number one contender, managed to get a 10-round decision in somewhat of a lackluster performance on the undercard, although he was fighting a late replacement, a guy that was pretty tough, pretty durable, pretty difficult. And Alvarez isn't necessarily like the same kind of like knockout, highlight reel type of showstopper that like a Stevenson is, or a Kovalev is, or like a Beterbiev is. Or even like a Joe Smith, the way he was able to take out Andre Fonfara. He's a little bit more of a boxer puncher, more of a cautious boxer, guy that kind of lets the knockout come rather than really looking for a knockout the way that those other guys tend to be a little bit more leaning towards. But I'd imagine Stevenson and Alvarez is probably going to have to take place sometime fairly soon. It seems like Alvarez has been his mandatory now for a little while, and he's been on his undercards a couple of times now. They've both headlined a number of times up in Montreal, so it just seems to make sense that fight would happen. Although Joe Smith may wind up getting next too, just because of the fact that they were trying to hype up a rematch between Stevenson and Fonfara, and obviously Joe Smith definitely upset the apple cart with regards to Fonfara's chances of actually getting that rematch, and so there's a possibility we may see that fight. Alvarez to me is really more of a stylistic threat in terms of technical ability, but Joe Smith is probably the bigger threat in terms of just overall being able to punch, being able to be a knockout threat in theory. Although I would favor Stevenson over both of them, and I'd actually give Alvarez the better chance of winning the fight just due to the fact that he's technically a bit better than Smith, for instance. Otherwise, funny enough, Arthur Beterbiev, the guy that I just mentioned recently, is the number 3 fighter. So I'd imagine that fight could be coming up at some point in maybe the next year or so. But it's anybody's guess. But unfortunately for Stevenson, it's looking like he's gonna wind up getting overshadowed by, to a certain degree, his former rival slash current rival Sergey Kovalev fighting against Andre Ward, who of course has moved up from super middleweight. Um, Managed to beat Chad Dawson before Stevenson did, which is why I consider Andre Ward to be the actual light heavyweight lineal champion, because 168 is still below 175, and Sugar Ray Leonard was a light heavyweight champion even though he beat Donnie Lalonde at 168. To me, it's the same type of deal. But basically, Stevenson unfortunately is stuck in a little bit of a rough position. But depending on who wins the Ward Kovalev fight, and depending on how the action turns out in that fight, there's a distinct possibility that the fan demand and the money may potentially be there in the future for Stevenson to fight the winner, which would be excellent and is really the fight that I think most everybody wants. In spite of the fact that these other guys that I mentioned definitely deserve their shot as well. They definitely deserve their shot at greatness. It's kind of sucks when you see guys that are big names kind of holding the titles hostage and trying to jockey up to fight each other, but not necessarily fighting their top contenders. So I definitely would like to see Stevenson fight one of the guys that I mentioned if he doesn't happen to go for a unification in his next fight. So that's pretty much all I have to say for this one. Props to Stevenson for the big knockout victory. Props to Williams for almost giving us a Fight of the Year candidate. It was getting very, very close to getting there. If he could have gotten up from that knockdown and maybe buzzed Stevenson once or twice more, we may have seen something for the ages. But it just wasn't to be, and Stevenson showed the class end of pressure. So that's it for this one. I'll catch you guys on the next. Peace.